Hello everyone, my name is Jessica Valera, and today I will be discussing a rather timely moral issue, immigration. More specifically, I will present the argument that the dignity of the human person and the family unit should be included as a component of our immigration policy. Usually when we hear immigration being talked about, it's from an economic perspective or from a political platform in the news. However, it is just as important, if not more so, to be considered from a moral perspective as well. We are called to see immigrants as people with dignity, just as much as we are called to see American citizens as people with dignity. Both immigrants and citizens are terms that are tossed around often, but we must remember that there are actual people behind these terms, and these people must be seen as such. John Isbister, in his article, Are Immigration Controls Ethical?, looks at the current immigration policy and the control on immigration from an ethical perspective, through an analysis of 6 different arguments, including throughout the consideration for the equal worth of individuals, dealing with their value and their rights. Isbister begins by talking about how economics are often the main point that is discussed when immigration is brought up. However, he also mentions that in terms of the best interest of the nation, economics is not the end-all be-all. There is more to life than the economy. He reminds us that although we claim to believe that all people are created equal, are equally valuable, and have equal rights as human beings, that our current immigration laws and policies don't necessarily reflect this. There are countless groups of people who have the desire and have the dream of living in America. But, as Isbister points out, in the big picture, only a select few are permitted to legally live here, the ones who will benefit America in some way. This shows how, as a nation, the self-interest of American priority are placed often before helping the disadvantaged, at least in terms of America's immigration policy. As Isbister goes on to explain 6 arguments for immigration controls that he has heard, the following: immigration is theft, immigration destroys important American values, we have better ways of helping the world's disadvantaged than immigration, Americans have an obligation to their fellow citizens before any obligation to immigrants. Americans are not obligated to be heroic to people outside of their nation, and immigration controls protect America's disadvantaged. He logically preserves the immigrant people and their value by poking holes in each of the first 5 arguments, as they are not necessarily morally sound. However, in the 6th argument, that immigration controls protect America's disadvantaged, Isbister shows careful consideration in mirroring the 2 vulnerable groups in American society: immigrants and the poor, low-skilled, underclass America. By doing this, Isbister is showing his concern for both immigrants and the disadvantaged people of America, and their dignity. He argues that we should allow for a larger amount of immigrants to our country as recognition of their worth as human beings, but we should also keep in mind the disadvantaged Americans as well. Kevin R. Johnson's article entitled The Intersection of Race and Class in U.S. Immigration Law and Enforcement looks at how the current American immigration policy tends to favor certain groups of people over others for several reasons, which are not necessarily consistent with giving dignity to the individuals seeking to immigrate, and are certainly not treated as such. Johnson argues that American identity, whether intentionally or not, seeks to marginalize poor citizens and working immigrants. He goes on to say that people of color have difficulty finding a legal avenue to come to America. Similarly, it is extremely difficult for poor foreigners, or foreigners who are likely to become poor, to immigrate to America legally. This is because before these people are even deemed worthy or acceptable to come, they undergo heavy screening, which includes, as Johnson briefly discusses, a look at age, health, and assets, resources, financial status, education, skills, and whether or not they have family connections already in America. If any of these criteria are not satisfactory or met, they are not even considered as a potential legal immigrant to the country. In this way, the potential immigrant is not seen as valued as the person with inherent dignity that they are. Rather, they are seen only if they can be a benefit to American society or not, valued by their what, in this case potential contribution, and not valued by their who, a human person. The way that the current immigration policy is set up, Johnson then argues, works to keep both poor and working colored immigrants from America, as they may not be as beneficial to the American ideal as other more desirable immigrants would be. But Johnson poses it is fair and moral to restrict such groups of people from a better life, and isn't America historically a nation of immigrants? Should something be done to preserve the dignity of the people who desire such a better life? As my topic and thesis suggests, I argue yes, there should be an implementation of a type of dignity of the human person added to our immigration policy that values and preserves personhood over talents or status. The third article I would like to present is Us versus Them, U.S. Immigration and the Common Good by Anna T. Bedard. Now, Bedard takes up the topic of morality and immigration from what she calls a Catholic feminist perspective, which is different than both previous articles. She emphasizes looking at the common good of society as a whole in regards to immigration. Bedard states that the common good of society is bigger than one nation. It extends to the whole world. Because of this, Americans then have a moral obligation to immigrants because immigrants are vulnerable members of society. Therefore, we are called to care for the well-being of the person in material, spiritual, moral, and physical dimensions. She expresses the need that Catholic social teaching should be applied to immigration, while also remembering that both immigrants and low-skilled American workers make up vulnerable groups in America. Because of this, the common good of society calls us to be prudent when dealing with American policies. This prudence extends into protecting the dignity and the human rights of immigrants. On most occasions, they are coming from places that threaten their basic needs, their basic capabilities, and even their lives at times. Bedard shares that such people should be allowed to live their full potential, and that more legal ways for such people to immigrate to America and be treated fairly in the process. Bedard also argues that if we are to help immigrants and to be welcoming to them, we should also seek to help the American poor as well. To be in solidarity with both groups, she says, shows recognition of the equal moral worth and dignity of all human persons. As mentioned in my introductory remarks, I believe that there is a need for the protection of the dignity of the human person in our immigration policy here in America. And, as reflected in the articles, many Americans are not particularly fond of immigrants, native-born minorities, or poor or low-skilled American workers for one reason or another. Bedard references Catholic social teaching in regards to immigration, which says the following. People have a right to find opportunities in their homeland. People have right to migrate to support themselves and their families. Sovereign nations, like America, have right to control their borders. Refugees and asylum seekers should be given protection, and human dignity and rights of both legal and undocumented migrants should be respected. However, as we see from articles like the intersection of race and class in the U.S. immigration law and enforcement, this ideal of Catholic social teaching is not necessarily practiced in our current immigration policy. Americans are not always welcoming to immigrants, and not all foreigners have equal opportunities to come to America. Because of this, I affirm that there should be a greater emphasis placed on the dignity of the human person and family in regards to immigration. This means that the spiritual and the moral dimensions of the person are to be considered for both the immigrant families, and the underclass members of American society, as we seek to promote and value the lives of our fellow men, doing our best to keep families united and for individual men and women to live their full potential, all of which God intends for us. Through a moral lens, we can further break down this same argument by looking at the contrast between the good to be done and the bad to be avoided in terms of immigration. From the perspective of the immigrant, the good to be done can be seen as moving to another country, which in this case would be America, to seek a better life or quality of life for himself or for his family. Also, the bad to be avoided, not done, is not doing everything in his moral or legal power to seek a better life for himself or for his family, or not removing himself or his family from a situation that jeopardizes their well-being. On the other hand, it is important to also consider the perspective of the American citizen in regards to the good to be done and the bad to be avoided. The good to be done by the American citizen is to lovingly welcome the immigrant to the extent that he or she is able to. Work towards upholding the dignity of the immigrant brothers and sisters, and to embrace to the best of our ability the words of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, the USCCB, in their publication Strangers No Longer, Together on the Journey of Hope, which reads, "We commit ourselves to your pastoral care and to the work towards changes in church and societal structures that impede your exercising your dignity and living as children of God. The bad to be avoided, therefore, is for Americans not to be judgmental, selfish, hateful, or spiteful to immigrants or native-born minorities. Do not turn a blind eye to immigrants who seek a better life for themselves or their families, or not to support immigration policies that are demeaning for immigrants or Americans alike." The Catechism of the Catholic Church offers a little commentary on the topic of immigration, but it is worth mentioning their statement, which reads, "The more prosperous nations are obliged, to the extent that they are able, to welcome the foreigner in search of the security and the means of livelihood which he cannot find in his country of origin. Public authority should see to it that the natural right is respected that places a guest under the protection of those who receive him." This statement is consistent with my argument for the dignity of the human person being added to our immigration policy thus far, as well as demonstrated with the good to be done and the bad to be avoided scenario. In conclusion, the dignity of the human person in the family unit should be added to the American immigration policy. As Isbister brings up in his article, equal moral worth of both Americans and immigrants must be considered, and in adding the dignity of the human person in the family unit to the immigration policy, both groups should be consistently protected. Yes, we should welcome more immigrants, protect them, and recognize them as our fellow man. All life is precious, and our policies and interactions with our brothers and sisters, both immigrants and citizens, should reflect this ideology. In the words of Christ in the Gospel of Matthew, "Amen, I say to you, whatever you did for one of the least of my brothers of mine, you did for me." We should do our part to uphold the dignity of the disadvantaged in the world, and adding a component to our immigration policy that ensures this dignity, I believe, is a step in the right direction. Thank you, and God bless.